sorry for the inconvenience caused earlier. So coming directly to the topic of urinary tract endometriosis. Generally, among gynecologists, we have a thought that the urinary tract endometriosis is not that common. It's because many a times when women comes to us with symptoms of endometriosis, basically dysmenorrhea, dyspareunia, or infertility, when we do an ultrasound, we'll be able to see endometrioma and adenomyosis and rectovaginal endometriosis. But we may not be able to visualize the ureteric or ureteric lesions because we are not looking in deep into that. So it's not that uncommon as we think, even though the literature says the incidence can be 0.3 to 12%, but it is around 20 to 50% in women, those who are having deep endometriosis. And mostly it is seen in bladder, around 70 to 85%, and in the ureter, 9 to 25%. Even though it is shown that the bladder endometriosis is more common than ureter endometriosis, in my personal experience, I have seen more of ureter endometriosis. It's more of extrinsic, but still, rather than bladder endometriosis. And kidney and urethral endometriosis is very rare. We'll discuss urinary bladder endometriosis and ureteric endometriosis separately. Coming to the urinary bladder endometriosis, like endometriosis, the urinary bladder endometriosis, it's the involvement of the detrusor muscle of the urinary bladder. So it can be either full thickness or partial thickness of the bladder. And the most commonly affected area is the base of the bladder, and it can progress to the dome of the bladder as well. What are the symptoms or what they generally present with? So when do we need to suspect that there is bladder endometriosis? Along with the symptoms of typical endometriosis like dysmenorrhea, many a time these patients present, say like during the period time, they may have urinary frequency, urgency, they do have dysuria, and sometimes they present with recurrent urinary tract infection. Though hematuria is not very common, hematuria usually happens when the lesion into the bladder. Many times it may be misdiagnosed as other chronic pain, chronic urinary bladder pain syndromes like interstitial cystitis and overactive bladder. Okay, so coming to the bladder endometriosis, I think as I mentioned earlier, the most common site of bladder endometriosis is on the base of the bladder, and it can extend to the dome as well. Then the symptoms, as I mentioned, along with the symptoms of endometriosis like dysmenorrhea, dyspareunia, they may have the patient with bladder endometriosis usually have complaints of dysuria, urinary urgency, frequency, and sometimes with recurrent urinary tract infection. And many a times it is misdiagnosed with other chronic bladder pain syndromes like overactive bladder, interstitial cystitis. Some of them, if the bladder lesions is into the urinary bladder, then they can present with cyclical hematuria as well. What is the diagnostic mode of diagnosing an bladder endometriosis? Ultrasound, we had we'll be having quite good lectures on ultrasound in endometriosis. So one of the best way to diagnose bladder endometriosis is ultrasound. So what all things we need to look while doing an anterior compartment ultrasound to detect the bladder endometriosis? So when we suspect or see a bladder nodule, we need to first check the size of the nodule, and we need to locate how many centimeters away from the ureteric orifice. And these are all very important to decide and plan for the surgery. Again, it is important to know whether there is uterine adenomyosis. International Endometriosis Association analysis has divided the bladder into 3 zones. That is basically to locate where exactly is the urinary bladder endometriosis. So the trigone is within 3 centimeters from the bladder neck and up to the ureteric orifice. And base is, when we look with the transvaginal ultrasound, the base is adjacent to the vagina and the cervix. And dome is the intraperitoneal, intra-abdominal part of the bladder, and the demarcation point between the base and the dome of the bladder is the utrovesical pouch. So basically, it's to locate the lesion and to decide about the surgical plan. In the first picture, we can see there is a bladder nodule. And again, when we look for the bladder nodule, we need to see the vascularity to differentiate whether it's a bladder malignancy. Here you can see in this video clip, there is a small bladder nodule at the base of the urinary bladder. So it is very important to look for this because in this video clip, we can see that first when we see, we may not identify that there is a bladder nodule, but on careful visualization, we can see there is bladder nodule, and the patient is having symptoms because of the bladder endometriosis. Then coming to management of bladder endometriosis. So once the diagnosis is done, the management of bladder endometriosis is definitely surgical management. And unlike the ureteric endometriosis, the bladder endometriosis is quite straightforward. Even diagnosing and surgical management also is quite straightforward. This is a patient who had typical symptoms of dysuria during the period time, and she had previous 2 cesarean sections. After second cesarean section, she developed severe pain and like that. So this is the cystoscopic view of the urinary bladder. You can see the lesion here of around 2 to 3 centimeter, and it's not always necessary that we need to demarcate the lesions, bladder nodule lesions, because again, why I would prefer to do it, because during the surgery it helps me to laparoscopically excise it better, and I know what is the demarcation of the endometriotic nodule. And most of the time in cases of previous cesarean section, the area of the cesarean scar, the bladder will be densely adherent, and beyond that there will be a good cleave of plane. So the dissection becomes much more easier below the cesarean scar site. And once the lesion is completely excised, it is very important to excise the lesion completely, because if we leave a residual lesion, then the chances of recurrence is much higher, and again going for a second surgery will be more complicated. And in patients, those who are having adenomyosis in that area, it needs to be excised, because if we don't excise the adenomyosis at that area, again the patient can have lots of adhesions and endometriosis developing into the bladder again. So once the lesion is excised, then the closure is with 2-layer closure. Here a V20 VLOC was used for the initial closure, and a second intermittent suture was used. So once the suturing and is done, the bladder integrity is checked using filling the bladder with a diluted methylene blue to see that it's sutured very well. So after the procedure, patient will be put on Foley's catheter for 10 to 14 weeks for a proper healing. So, and if the lesion is close to the ureteric orifice, then usually we need to stent the ureter while during the procedure to safeguard the ureteric orifice. Coming to the ureteral endometriosis. Ureteral endometriosis, when it says, it's again endometriotic tissues developing in the muscularis of the ureter. But it is a little confusing term, because majority of the time what we see is the peritoneum over the surface of the endometrium will be involved, and or the lesions on the peritoneum or surrounding the ureter, the lesion progresses and encloses the ureter. So ureteral endometriosis is divided into 2 types. Basically, the intrinsic endometriosis, which is less common, that is around 20%, where the endometriosis develops in the ureter wall, resulting in fibrosis and hypertrophy of muscularis propria, giving symptoms and it's usually the ureteric endometriosis, the patient doesn't experience much symptoms. Then the commonest type is the extrinsic ureteric endometriosis, where the endometriosis develops primarily outside the ureteric wall and causes the compression from outside. This is more commonly seen in patients, those who are having rectovaginal nodule or when there is a uterosacral nodule. We should suspect ureteric endometriosis those who are in those who are having rectovaginal endometriotic nodules of more than 3 centimeter, and in those who are having ureteric endometriosis of lesions more than 1.5 centimeter. Unlike the bladder endometriosis, ureteric endometriosis is most of the time asymptomatic. That is why majority of the time this is diagnosed very late, and by the time 25 to 50% of them, they can have silent kidney loss. And very few patients, they can have flank pain, and most of the time it will be missed by the patient because they'll be having other symptoms of endometriosis as well. How do we diagnose ureteric endometriosis? So the diagnosis is primarily ultrasound, but like bladder endometriosis, ureteric endometriosis is not very easy to be diagnosed with the ultrasound. So we may have to use a MR or a CT urogram to confirm the diagnosis. And well, while doing a transvaginal ultrasound, we need to suspect the involvement of the ureter, as if there is a nodule in the torus or in the rectovaginal nodule or in the uterosacral ligament. And so while doing an ultrasound, where exactly we should see for the ureteric involvement or ureteric dilatation to see for hydroureteronephrosis. So majority of the time, the lesions of the endometriosis which causes the ureteric compression will be in the torus region and in the uterosacral region and in the pararectal region. So our tracing should start from the bladder, and for the lower ureter, we need to start seeing from in between the bladder and the torus. But this area, it's slightly difficult to identify the ureter unless we are quite experienced or there is a dilatation in the ureter. Next, the middle ureter is the most common area where there is involvement of the endometriosis, and that we need to see between the torus and the pelvic brain. We need to move the probe laterally to behind and lateral to the torus so that we can see a dilated ureter. And when it comes to the near pelvis, we need to look near the iliac vessels, and that area also, if there is a hydroureter, it is much more easier to see the dilated ureter. And upper ureter, definitely it should be a transabdominal ultrasound, and we need to see for hydronephrosis. So these are the areas to look for the ureter. So upper ureter near the bladder and the torus, and middle ureter near the torus and the uterosacral and the parametrium, and the again near the pelvic brim to be seen near the ovary as well as the iliac vessels. So this is a video showing a dilated ureter. Here you can see there is actually there is a hemorrhagic cyst, but there is a dilated ureter near that ovary. So when we see something like this hypoecheric tubular thing, we may get confused whether it's a vessel or even sometimes like a collected fluid or a hydrosalpinx. So when we put a Doppler, we can exclude this confusion of whether it's a iliac vessel or not. And if you wait for some time, we can see the vermification of the ureter. So even though here the cyst is small and we may suspect it as an hemorrhagic cyst, but still the patient is having an endometriotic lesion, and it is causing compression in the lower ureter and leading to hydronephrosis. So these are the things we may miss with a just transvaginal ultrasound looking only for the ovaries and the uterus. It is very important to see the kidneys, because if the person who is doing an ultrasound for endometriosis is not very well experienced in identifying the hydroureter in the pelvis, then it is like many a times it's difficult to see. So in that situation, it is easier to identify or just to do a screening transabdominal ultrasound to know whether there is a hydronephrosis or not. So in cases of mild to moderate hydronephrosis, we can see dilated pelvis and calyces. And in severe cases of hydronephrosis, definitely there is no confusion. We can make out the diagnosis. It's always important to do a trans-abdominal ultrasound to see for any hydronephrosis, because to find out the ureteric dilatation may be sometimes difficult, especially if it is just 5 millimeter or 6 millimeter of hydroureter. So once the diagnosis of hydroureter is made, either with ultrasound or before going to the procedure, if there is a big nodule of rectovaginal nodule or a uterosacral nodule, to be on the safer side, it's better to do a MR urography or a CT urography to confirm and plan the surgery. So when it is planning for a surgical management of ureteric endometriosis, most of the time we will be doing a ureterolysis based on where and how the endometriosis is affecting the ureter. So as I said earlier, 80% of ureteric endometriosis is extrinsic lesion. It probably may be just a thickening or endometriotic lesion on the peritoneum overlying the ureter and causing fibrosis and causing a kink on the ureter. Or it can be the large ovarian endometrioma adherent to the lateral pelvic wall and causing fibrosis of the peritoneum, or previous multiple surgeries leading to fibrosis and the uterosacral nodule compressing the ureter. So based on what type of endometriotic lesion, we need to decide what type of surgery we have to plan. The second method is to go for a ureteroureterostomy. This is basically for intrinsic type, or if there is a lesion on the ureter and it is causing a kink on the ureter, or there is a stricture on the ureter in those cases, and especially if it is in the middle ureter, not in the lower ureter. Ureteroneocystostomy is preferred in patients who are having a ureteric lesion or a kink or a stricture which is in the lower third of the ureter. And if the patient has a silent kidney loss and then there is no other option, if there is not a function of the kidney, then nephrectomy is the only option in that case. So in this video, you can see that the ureter, the peritoneum, there is a thickening of the peritoneum overlying the ureter near the uterosacral ligament. And here an NSEAL is used. As we know, NSEAL is a modified bipolar. So the thermal spread of NSEAL is less than the conventional bipolar, but still there is. So we should be very careful of using such instruments near the ureter. So it's always, while separating the lesions, it's always better to use a energy source which has less thermal spread, or a cold scissors. So in this case, this lesion is encircling the ureter, and once the lesion is excised, we can completely see that the ureter has become absolutely normal. And many a times, like when the patient has undergone multiple surgeries, we will be in a very difficult situation where we can see that the ureter will be completely plastered completely plastered and very difficult to isolate from the surrounding structures. In those cases, in endometriosis, basically we need to start dissecting from the area where the lesions or the fibrosis is less. So in this, we have to dissect completely laterally. So we all know that the blood flow to the ureter comes laterally, and while we separate it laterally, there is a chance that causing devascularization of the ureter. So it's always important to do a ureterolysis or separating the ureter without causing any damage to the adventitia. Because even if the ureter there is no leak of the ureter, but still later on it can go for a necrosis, because avascular necrosis, and lead to fistula formation. And again, when we are using any energy source near the ureter, at the time of the surgery, we may not find any problem, but later on this can lead to stricture and again, problems leading to kidney damage. When patients come with silent kidney loss, and especially they have undergone surgeries multiple times, we may be quite surprised whether it is surgery-induced stricture or it is endometriosis-induced stricture. Because when there is bleeding, many a times we may have to coagulate on those areas, and unnecessary or coagulation can lead to stricture in future, and that leads to damage of the kidney because of stricture. So it's very important to do a proper ureterolysis and to decide whether to put a stent in the ureter, prophylactic stenting in the ureter. Majority of the time, when the dissection is extensive dissection, we would prefer to put a stent, prophylactic stent in the ureter. And if it is in a center where oncology surgeries or large number of colorectal resections have been done, so if they have a facility of near infrared fluorescence, then we can do an ICG and see the vascularization of the ureter. If the good vascularization is good, then we don't have to put a prophylactic stenting after the ureterolysis. So the second method of ureteric surgery is to go for a uretero-ureteral anastomosis. Uretero-ureteral anastomosis is basically preferred in the middle and the upper ureter, not in the lower ureter. In this video, you can see it's a very badly damaged ureter where it needs a resection and it needs a resection. But again, whether it's a resection and anastomosis or a resection and implantation into the bladder, it basically depends upon the location and sometimes depends upon the choice of the urologist. Some of the urologists may not prefer to do a lower ureteric resection and anastomosis because that can lead to stricture formation and again the same problem of blockage and stricture and needing another surgery. So it's better not to go for a resection and anastomosis if the lesion is much lower down. But if it is a higher level, if it is in the middle and if there is an adequate length, then we can definitely go for a uretero-ureteral anastomosis. So most of the time in endometriosis, we see a lower lesion, and majority of the time in those cases, we may have to go for a ureteroneocystostomy. So this is a surgical plan. So if the patient, we see that if there is hydroureteronephrosis, then when we are planning for a laparoscopy, either we can do a stenting before the procedure or stenting like after the procedure. It depends upon the surgeon's choice. Some surgeons, they prefer to put a stent before dissecting. Some, they do prefer to put the stent after the dissection. So once the ureterolysis is done, if it is an unsuccessful ureterolysis, unsuccessful or unsatisfactory. Unsuccessful means like we are not able to dissect, take out the endometriotic lesion completely, or if cautery has been used or there is some thermal injury to the ureter. In those situations, it is better to go for a ureteric anastomosis or to go for a ureteroneocystostomy. But if you are sure that if the ureteric lesions is completely taken out and the ureter is good with good vascularity, then in that case, we make go for just a ureterolysis and the follow up the patient regularly to see that she's not developing further problems. So coming to the end of my presentation, ureteric endometriosis, one thing to be always when we are doing a scan, even if we are not able to make out any ureteric involvement by a transvaginal scan, at the end of the doing a scan, do a transabdominal scan just to see whether there is any kidney involvement. Why it is very important is many a times we may be looking when the patient has mild symptoms and we may be looking for an ovarian endometrioma, and we'll be putting them on medical management without evaluating properly. And if there is a compression of the lower ureter, and we may be putting them on medical management for a long time and following it up with just transvaginal ultrasound and missing this ureteral endometriosis or compression, and finally they'll end up in losing their kidney. It is not an uncommon thing. I can say in past 2 years, I have seen 2 patients with losing 1 kidney because of this. And they had undergone multiple surgeries earlier for endometriosis, and just following it up with definitely this ureteric involvement would have been then earlier, and it was missed during the primary surgeries. And while doing ultrasound, if we suspect there is a nodule or rectovaginal nodule or uterosacral thickening, then it's better to further evaluate with MR urography. If we cannot identify with, because all the facilities, they may not be having a very good radiologist or a gynecologist who are very like expert in doing a transvaginal ultrasound to identify all the lesions. So in those centers where no expertise is available, it's always better to go for an MR urogram and MRI pelvis to evaluate about the more lesions. And while doing the surgery, it's very important to avoid any thermal injury to the ureter and to try to avoid any damage to the adventitia, because this can lead to later on necrosis or stricture and cause fistula to the patient. Thank you so much for the patient listening, and I'm happy that at least my videos could work well, and I'm able to be the last speaker.
Thank you, Dr. Alfie.